Right, so we've just about come out the other side of the server slam that Bungie have had for Marathon over the weekend, and it's been a pretty interesting one. A lot of mixed feedback and thoughts on the game. One of the most notable components really being that, obviously, when the game dropped, given that this was already divisive, we had the initial kind of day one peak in player numbers, and over that first 24-hour period, a lot of people kind of bounced away from the game for one reason or another, right? This is not me being massively negative. I think this is kind of expected with a game like Marathon because it has a steep learning curve, as we've already spoken about, as well as a very strong style, and Bungie are kind of doing the extraction shooter thing in their own way. So players obviously have different responses to that. I've already given my thoughts on early reactions to Marathon, plus Bungie announced some changes that they're planning for the game. We'll speak about that in a moment. I know not everyone loves looking at these Steam numbers or whatever, but the day one peak was 143,000 players, only on Steam. I appreciate there are other platforms which may be potentially bigger than Steam, especially PlayStation, given that this is a Sony Studios game. 24 hours in, Saturday's peak was around 84,000 players, with Sunday peaking at around 70,000 players. An extra thing we should keep in mind is that there are a margin of players who kind of got in, experienced the game for a day, and are now waiting for the full launch given that progress is going to be reset, so there's a lot of folks who are not going to grind like maniacs, only to repeat it in 3 or 4 days. However, the players that have kind of stuck around after that first 24 hours quite often are saying that the game has actually grown on them significantly, and I think part of this is the fact that Marathon has quite a bit of depth, so as you start getting into the kind of faction contracts, the upgrades, and generally making your runners more powerful through gear, stat boosts, and all that kind of stuff, players are discovering that the gameplay component actually gets better, both in terms of the power fantasy, but also the understanding of the game, which I think is a really big positive for it so far. Interestingly, when we look at a lot of the people who are currently putting a good amount of time into Marathon, there are actually a lot of Destiny 2 PvP players who've been around over the years, who are currently quite heavily engaged with this. So that's a positive in a sense, because at the same time, obviously inside of the Bungie crowd, there are a lot of primarily PvE players, right? And it isn't a universal rule, but that's the crowd who potentially find it a bit more difficult to actually get into Marathon. Then, looking more broadly at folks covering the game in the FPS space, including big streamers, there are quite a few who've played over the course of the weekend, and yes, Bungie did have a big ad campaign for Marathon, naturally. That shouldn't really be a surprise to anyone. But coming away from that campaign, I've seen some folks who've kind of gone back to what they were doing before, right? Whether it's Arc Raiders or other games. But equally, you have very popular content creators like Burnt Peanut, who's been singing Marathon's praises and also encouraging folks to stick with it and kind of get into the endgame and not hammer it based on early impressions, right? So my overall takeaway is that it is still very mixed, but while lots of people just straight up do not like Marathon, there is a crowd who are kind of engaging and sticking with it and finding a fair amount of depth in its kind of progression and the sandbox. So the big question in terms of the commercial product and whether this is viable and successful for Bungie is whether that crowd that they've kind of got glued to Marathon now will be enough for it to be a big success. We should also remember, even when games like D1 released, the beta had very mixed responses, as did the early game, and then as Bungie showed off more of the kind of intricate and very unique components of Destiny, like when the Vault of Glass launched, that actually started to garner even more interest in the product, right? So if the server slam tells me anything, it tells me that we could be looking at a similar situation with Marathon. And I appreciate, as a Destiny content creator right now, I might be getting flamed in the comment section by saying that because there are lots of people who just don't like it, and that's absolutely fine. I'm simply recognizing the reality that Marathon may continue to grow on more people as time goes on, but it may also end up being kind of a niche crowd game. Where a smaller player base, and when we say smaller, we're comparing it to a very high watermark with things like Arc Raiders being around, but nonetheless, potentially quite a dedicated crowd for Marathon. So on a commercial level, the question becomes, will there be enough players for Bungie and Sony to consider this a success? Given the amount of cash that's actually been spent on Marathon, right, you're talking hundreds of millions of dollars. And so launch will absolutely be the true test, and I think not only the first, couple of days, but the first 2 or 3 weeks when Marathon drops will be incredibly important. So share your thoughts and impressions on it down below. But as I said before, it's not Concord 3 or 4 or whatever people are saying. I've even seen some creators in the Destiny space kind of making that comparison or asking the question, right? And honestly, it's a ludicrous argument because if I'm not mistaken, our Concord ended up with like hundreds of players on its launch day. So we're nowhere even close to that territory with Marathon. Let me know your thoughts below. Yes, I added timestamps to this video because we also have a bunch of updates from Bungie right here about what they're planning to do with the game. So following the server slam, Bungie have said, first off, thanks to all of those who've been running around Tau Ceti, many of you have left empty shells and bags behind, while some of you have found goodies and made it off-world successfully. Either way, you've all been brave, adventurous, and chaotically unpredictable in a great way. And they thank players for all of the feedback that they've had. Things that they're currently looking at to either tune or potentially add to Marathon in the future are additional queue options. So currently we have the ability to run a solo, be it Rook or as a runner in a solo lobby. Plus, you can queue in with a duo or full trio, but we've heard the feedback about duo dedicated lobbies, and this has been logged and shared with the team. And I think duos as an option would be good, especially with the amount of kind of contract progression that there is in the game. It can actually be kind of a hard sell to say, hey, I know you two guys need to do this, but I need to finish this contract. So could we take an additional risk and head over here to collect X, whatever it is, for my quest objective, right? So I think having duos in the game is just going to make it easier for more players to progress with their friends, right? And generally have fun. So not a bad thing to do. Otherwise, they're looking at unbinding keys, so they say for players, especially on console, there's been steady feedback about the desire not just to rebind a key, but to clear the key binding altogether. Otherwise, for PvP feedback, they say time to kill is the hot topic. Some of you want longer duels and more runner contact, others are vibing with the current pace, and we're reviewing runner density on non-beginner maps and keeping a close eye on how Perimeter and Dire Marsh feel overall. There's a lot of feedback about people not getting into enough PvP engagements. I guess really it depends what your expectation is, but if you're playing the game in a certain way, going to the hotspots where PvP tends to happen, but also using generally spatial awareness to pick up on where are other teams currently fighting, right? You do hear firefights going off in the distance, which obviously you can choose to get involved with and look for PvP engagements or go off and attempt to do your own thing. So in terms of finding other players, I don't have a massive issue with it right now. Time to kill is pretty hot, to be fair. You'll go down very quickly in Marathon. Some players like that. I'm kind of leaning towards maybe that time to kill could be a little bit longer without it posing a massive issue, just given the nature of the game, right? The fact that we're also fighting PvE, looting items, having to move off to heal up and all that kind of stuff. I'm not massively bothered by the current time to kill in the game, but based on how it plays and some of the other mechanics going on, it's certainly something that Bungie should be exploring. Let me know your thoughts about it. They're also looking into med and ammo economy, so we hear you that meds are soaking a lot of your early loadout budget, and that back-to-back fights can chew through med and ammo reserves pretty quickly, and we've seen some folks for and against the depleted items as well, along with how rewarding drops from AI are. If you ran dry mid-fight or at a critical spot in your run, tell us about it, so they're asking for more feedback on this. I guess overall, one of the kind of positive changes they could make would be to kind of increase some of the stack sizes of medkits and ammo in general, right? So that you're carrying less individual items around at a given time. Ammo can absolutely be a problem, and so can meds. And I think because there are so many items in the game, including shields and things that affect the sandbox, the perks, the weapons, and all that kind of stuff, while ammo and meds are important, they're not fun like the loot potentially is, right? So while I absolutely think that they should be a thing that players are aware of and tracking with an element of risk, I wouldn't have an issue if Bungie were to up the stack sizes of those things significantly, just to make them more readily available and to potentially consume less space in backpacks and stuff like that. But that's just my thoughts. Otherwise, they are still looking into UI feedback, and they say, we plan to continue iterating on this post-launch. We want to make sure you're able to easily navigate, read what's happening mid-fight, manage your equipment effectively, and see your pings without any noise around them. They again have a thread on UI feedback, and the UI is absolutely something that gets easier to deal with and navigate over time. There are also lots of shortcuts on weapons to view mods and attachments, other shortcuts in menus that aren't necessarily immediately obvious, which is part of that steep learning curve that players have referenced with Marathon. So it's hard to say exactly how Bungie can improve this, because there still are lots of items and things that actually need managing, as well as progression things, which I appreciate when you're first getting into the game are quite difficult to get your head around for some players. As I've said before though, I'm not a game dev, so it's hard for me to suggest how that could be improved. Otherwise, they are looking more into PC performance, including reports of high CPU use, low GPU utilization, FPS ceilings, and more. But I imagine these kinds of things won't change significantly now before launch, if at all, so we'll see how it goes when it actually drops. They did, however, fix a bunch of things during the server slam, including in-run voice chat, so the prox chat is now working as intended. They also increased the lobby size in terms of player count on the beginner versions of some of the maps, which, if you've played for more than an hour or so, you won't even notice because you won't have access to the beginner maps, so it's really based on feedback from folks who've literally just started playing. Otherwise, they did fix some issues with mouse input lag on PC as well, so Bungie have done plenty of things during the server slam, to be fair, and they're saying they have more planned. Let me know your thoughts on all of those items and other things that Bungie should be doing with Marathon if you're interested. I can totally relate to what some other folks have said in terms of the game actually growing on you. One of the most jarring things for me in the first day or so was getting my head around the menus, all the systems, the rewards. I'm still kind of adjusting to it at this precise point in time, but there's a bit of a hook there with Marathon that kind of makes me want to jump back into it and get better at it. And I wasn't really sure that I was going to feel that way about Marathon during the first day, but as time's gone on, I do kind of feel that way. So I'm just going to take it as it comes, to be honest. When the game drops, I'll play it, and if I'm having fun with it, I'll carry on playing it. That doesn't mean that I think Marathon's going to take over the world or be the greatest thing since sliced bread. I don't really know how it's all going to pan out over time. But as I've said before, for me personally, with it being a $40 game, if I have fun with it for a few weeks and then don't ever play it again, I wouldn't personally consider that to be a huge loss. But I know everyone's different, right? So I'm not here to tell anyone how to feel, I'm just giving you some news updates. Of course, we've reflected on how the Server Slam has kind of gone overall. And yeah, I dropped a couple of opinions there as well. But you can do the same in the comment section, so let me know your thoughts. I'll keep you posted when Bungie give us more updates, because they'll probably have a few things to initiate players before the launch on Thursday, and they did say they'll be dropping a roadmap as well. That'll have details about when the Cryo Archive stuff, the UESC ship, or the maps become available, some of the ranked play components, and possibly other stuff. So I'll let you know when we get that roadmap. But for the moment, if you enjoyed the video, a rating would really help us out. Hit subscribe as well so I can keep you posted. But otherwise, cheers for tuning in, and I hope you have an awesome day.